Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good day. Welcome to our 12-step workshop. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Please join me in prayer. An open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps in you. For an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, Bill uses that metaphor on page 25 of rocketed into the fourth dimension. And we've been at this now for a long time, since January of this year, 9 months. And we've completed this first stage of the rocket launch after probably about 4 or 5 months. That is, establishing the need for power and then a relationship with power. My definition of spirituality is not fancy. It's very practical. Spirituality is a relationship with the Spirit. That's not complicated. Now, it does take some thinking, some imagination, some willingness. In fact, Bill says that willingness is the cornerstone. And then some commitment. That's all. This first stage of the rocket launch, this commitment to action. There's no action other than the prayer, and that's an action. But it's really a public witness to the commitment for more action. And that is this second stage of the rocket. To identify and remove the obstacles in us to that power that is in us. It's a faith decision that there is power and that it's in us. We reviewed that many times. A faith decision, a decision of my will. The antidote to my willfulness is my willingness. The proper use of the will is not with regard to my addiction. It's not even with regard to my unmanageability. Bill says it on page 53. God or no God. That's the proper use of our will. So the problem is that we have obstacles in us to this power that is in us. Bill uses another metaphor, the sunlight of the Spirit. I just love that. I've been using it more in the last 3 years than I ever have. The contrast between darkness and light. Living in the light. Awake rather than asleep. We've spent quite a bit of time on the fourth step, my goodness, probably 4 months at least, which has delivered us here. In September, we gave the instructions on 5 and 6. That went very quickly. And now tonight, we're going to be taking a look at step 7. And I'll be inviting you to pray step 7. as a community, just like we did with step 3. Now, the big book doesn't suggest that, but it was my experience. And that's how we will conclude tonight. So this is the second stage of the rocket launch. We're going to complete it tonight. As part of that completion, I will be giving you the assignment for step 8. That's the next most substantial assignment. We'll spend quite a bit of time on it. The big book spends 8 pages, pages 76 to 83, 7 or 8 pages, including the promises. On steps 8 and 9, I'll talk more about that next week, step 8, in contrast to step 9. I make a very huge effort to separate out our discussions between step 8 and 9, even though Bill on page 76 almost combines them. They're in consecutive sentences. But this is where we started out, each one of us pathetic in our addiction. The bondage of addiction. And I use that phrase because it's a wonderful contrast to the unmanageability, which is the bondage of self. Step 1 is about bondage. The first half about addiction, and the second half about the spiritual malady, the cancer of the soul. And we want freedom. In order to have freedom, we need power, but we also need action. The magic alchemy formula: willingness and action. Grace and the Spirit. On the one hand, our role and effort. On the other hand, some mysterious component that we can attempt to describe, but really we don't understand it. We give it a name, maybe different names, but we really don't understand it. The book uses God as we understand God. I've regularly said God as we don't understand God. The book uses the term higher power. Dr. Berger uses, I quote him a lot because he's my co-facilitator, a clinical psychologist with 50 years of sobriety this year. He says the organismic life force. For those of you who have any resistance to any type of religious connotation to steps 2 or 3, it doesn't have necessarily a religious connotation. It's that life force that allows an acorn to grow into an oak tree. One of my most favorite pictures in the PowerPoint presentation. An acorn. How does it know and how does it happen that it becomes an oak tree? And we could do similarly with many other kinds of things, not the least of which is another one of my favorite metaphors, the butterfly. How does the egg develop into a caterpillar, develop into the death of the caterpillar in the chrysalis, and the emergence of this monarch butterfly? An amazing process. Oh, I'm not a scientist, so I'm sure it's all explainable, but from a layperson and sort of a poetic perspective, it's pretty marvelous. Freedom. That metamorphosis, that's the fancy word. Meta meaning beyond, change. Morphos is the Greek word for change. Metamorphosis. That freedom that comes guaranteed by the big book. It's not Herb's guarantee, please. It's Herb's experience watching people. But the big book says on page 84, we are placed in a position of neutrality. We get in the rocket ship, and the rocket ship takes us to where it's going. Part of the rocket ship, and I'm staying with that now, comparison. The astronauts do some work in there to keep it to the trajectory correct, and then when they get in orbit, to keep it in orbit. We get in the rocket, and the rocket takes us to where the rocket's going, but we do have some chores, some responsibility. In the 7th step, that's the conclusion for, that's the takeaway from the 6th step. Oh, we can name it and talk about it. We did that last week. The second half of the Tuesday meeting and all of the Monday meeting, we talked about character defects. And the implication in the big book is that we're powerless. But it says in step 6 that we be willing to have them removed, even if we're really not ready, and we're really not ready, that we pray for the readiness and the willingness. That's key. That's why I'm emphasizing it right now, in my experience. And then, of course, to pray for the removal. That's the 7th step. I mean, I could open up the big book, and I will here, looking at it for just a minute. On page 76, that second paragraph says, when ready, we say something like this. And then it gives us the prayer. At the end of the prayer, it says amen. And then it says, we have then completed step 7. That's why I indicated earlier in the month that step 6 and 7 will go really fast in terms of the teaching on it. First of all, there's not much in the big book. There's a lot more in the 12 and 12. Do yourself a real favor. If you haven't already read step 6 and 7, when you come to 6 and 7, you don't need to do that at this point if you're not finished your 4th step or you haven't completed your 5th step. But after you complete your 5th step, please read step 6 out of the 12 and 12. Please read step 7 out of the 12 and 12. Especially the step 7 commentary by Bill, which is on humility. Well, because step 7 says on page 59, humbly asked God. Humbly. That's the way he starts out in the step itself. He doesn't say that on page 76. He just has the prayer. But he's telling us about the attitude in the step in itself, the way it's crafted, humbly. It comes from the Latin word humus, which means earth or dirt. And I don't mean to negative or diminutive. No, it means one of many, like the sand pebbles, grains of sand on the beach. Millions of grains of sand, all of them quite different, like snowflakes, each one quite different in their shape, and yet anonymous in their individuality. That's the point of humble or humility, especially in the big book where Bill talks about anonymity as a spiritual principle. That is one of many in a community. But I also find it really fascinating for me as I've thought about it and wrote out my own 7-step prayer, which was one of the instructions or invitations for you to do when you're ready to do your 7-step. Not that you have to have completed that assignment by now. I just gave you the instructions on it. But that the prayer starts out, my Creator is perfect. We've identified all of the obstacles in us, all the darkness in us in step 4. We've identified it out loud in confession, transparent, revelation of all the darkness, shining the light into the very deep corners, being transparent. But also recognizing that we're powerless over all of those obstacles. Resentment, there was an elaborate prayer practice, 2 pages almost, that Bill gives us on 66 and 67 for the removal of deep resentment. A very short reference in the fear inventory, but still every bit as powerful. You can name it your fear. You can talk about it. You can describe it. You can analyze it. You just can't get rid of it in the final analysis. So you pray. And then by implication in the sex inventory, he says we need to pray for the right ideal and then the power to actually implement it. Staying very true in integrity to what he says in the 11th step. We've gone over that, how the 11th step ends, praying for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Totally built for us as human beings. The 2 things that make us human, our mind and our will. Our mind to know and to know that it knows. But nothing happens until we move our feet. We make a decision and take action. And so there's a whole dimension of the recovery program, steps 1 through 9, as well as the program for living, steps 10 through 11, that 1-2 punch to know better and to do better. And even though we know better and don't do better, we have the 10th step for corrective actions. To know better and to do better. So the 7-step prayer starts out, my creator. Oh my God. I've admitted all these defects of character in step 5. I've analyzed them and perhaps talked about them with somebody. It doesn't say that in the big book. It is my experience, and it was my suggestion to talk about it. Make a list if you want to. It was my experience. Analyze them. See if you can get to the underlying cause and condition, the exact nature. When I did that, I saw resentment and fear and dishonesty, fight, flight, and freeze, just like the big book suggests in step 4. And on page 62, the big book suggests that selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. Oh my God, we saw it as we did and completed step 4, but really heard it deeply in our soul, I hope, in step 5. The whole point of step 5, reading out loud consecutively for the very first time, perhaps in one or maybe several sittings, but still hearing it out loud consecutively for the very first time and being absolutely horrified at who we were and the impact of that on other people, let alone ourselves, of course. And then looking at step 6 to see that how broken we are. I used to use that word, as you know, in the set-aside prayer. I changed it this year. This is the first year I changed it from brokenness to unmanageability. It seems more relevant since that's the second half of the first step. That's actually the problem. Addiction's not the problem. Addiction's a problem. Unmanageability is the problem. And as Bill describes it, I've adopted it, but Bill describes it as the spiritual malady, as the problem. He says, we're not cured on page 85. We're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. He's not talking about our addiction. On page 84, he's already said we've been placed in a position of neutrality with regard to that, AKA recovered. But we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve from our unmanageability, our willfulness, our self-will, our selfishness and self-centeredness, which is the way we're built, and it's a spiritual malady. And we're powerless over it. Read page 62. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. Oh my God, is there an echo in this room? Powerless penetrates every step. It's the foundation of every step, the assumption of every step. And yet I'm fully responsible. And that's the 1-2 punch that I learned through experience. And I'm going to talk about it right now in step 6 and 7. The prayer begins, my creator, because I need to be recreated. Perfect. And I mentioned an observation. It's not in any of the literature. It's just my observation that step 3 doesn't have an amen. My experience is that all prayers I've ever encountered have an amen at the end of it, because it means the end of the prayer, the end of the request, the end of the process. Step 3 doesn't have an amen. I was just curious about it. I have no idea what the truth is, but my story is, don't let facts get in the way of a good story, but is that Bill must have thought that this was the beginning of a process, this prayer, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 7 being the end of the process, and at the end of the 7th step prayer, there's an amen. That process I mentioned at the beginning of our evening tonight of establishing a relationship with ourselves. That's spiritual, a relationship with myself. I see my powerlessness, steps 4, 5, 6. But I've also identified my responsibility. And Bill says in step 6 that although we're powerless, we need to be willing, and willing to be willing. So the story. I did my 5th step on a Friday, several hours. I did my 6th step on Saturday. I've mentioned it and described it. I'm not going to do that again. There was nothing there that I wanted to keep. I was very clear. I wrote out my own 7-step prayer and reviewed it with my step guide on that afternoon, evening on Saturday. And on Sunday, I went into my bedroom, I got on my knees, and I prayed the prayer from the book. I prayed my own prayer also, and then I prayed the prayer from the book quietly by myself. I woke up Monday morning, and the primary character defect that I had during the entire year of doing this work with this man was still very dominant. I knew it intuitively. I was disappointed. That's an understatement. Thought about it, prayed about it, talked about it to my sponsor a little bit. He said, come to the Thursday night Men's Stag Step Study meeting, which was my home group at the time. I attended a Men's Stag crosstalk meeting. Very focused, very accountable, somewhat confrontive in the best of senses. Everybody wanted everybody to have a good experience and to not be enabled by any type of softness, if you will. And in that meeting on Thursday night, a man shared something from his experience. He said he prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. Well, up to that point, I'm very familiar with the big book, step 6 and 7. I'm very familiar with the discussions from step meetings, step study meetings and book study meetings. I have already in detail discussed it with my step guide, both 6 and 7, and nowhere in the big book or in the 12 and 12, or in any of those discussions, was it mentioned to pray specifically for the removal of a specific character defect? Now, if you think I'm grinding on this too much, it's because it's so important. For me, it was life-changing. I heard that. I didn't accept it immediately. I went home, I thought about it, got a good night's sleep the next day, Friday, I'm thinking about it all day. And Saturday, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to try that. I'm going to have an open mind. I'm just going to try that. So I went into my bedroom and I got on my knees. And I want to be clear, the man who took me through the steps, and every man who's taken me through the steps out of the big book, has asked me to pray the the third step prayer on our knees together, and the 7-step prayer on my knees, sometimes together and sometimes not. In this case, I was not with my step guide. I had prayed it on my own, as I told you before. So he said, and every one of them has said, we don't get on our knees to get God's attention. You've heard me say this in the third step connection. We get on our knees to get our own attention, to really be conscious and have an intentional consciousness. We get on our knees for humility, an act of subordination, an act of deference, an act of respect, an act of plea. Prayer doesn't change God. I'm very clear on that. We've had that discussion in steps 2 and 3. Prayer changes the prayer. I don't know how that works, and we don't need to discuss that right now. We've had lots of those discussions before. So I went into my bedroom and I shut my door and I got on my knees and I'm about to pray. I'm about to pray the prayer from the big book, the one on page 76, that second paragraph, specifically for the removal of this specific character defect. And I had to stop because I was very conscious and I was very intentional, as I'm describing it now in maybe too much detail, but I had to stop. It actually took my breath away, the realization that I wasn't willing at all. I wasn't willing to be changed or to change my behavior with regard to this character defect at all. And yet I had spent months preparing a 4th step, hours doing a 5th step, as I discussed, and a diligent process of step 6 in the preparation for step 7. I was shocked that I wasn't willing to pray because I wasn't willing to change. But I did remember, both from my own work and with the work with my step guide and with the step group meeting, the crosstalk men's stag meeting, the key for step 6 was willingness. And if you're not willing to pray for the willingness, so I prayed for the willingness to be willing, to be willing, to be willing. Quite frankly, it was very remote. I really, even during that time on my knees, praying the prayer, knew in my heart of hearts, I was really not willing. But I was willing. There was a crack of the door, the light. There was, you've heard from the big book. Well, I got up and I went and I called this step guide man and I shared it because it was a pretty big epiphany. All that preparation and that I'm not willing. And then I prayed specifically for the willingness to be willing. And he listened very carefully and very patiently to all of my discussion about it. Didn't ask me any questions. And he said, wow, that's a pretty wonderful experience that you've had. Now, Herb, stop the behavior. Oh, I get quite emotional when I think about it because it was like cold water in my face. And he gave me another insight. oh, wow, I'm powerless over the character defect, but I'm 100% responsible for how it manifests in my behavior. And then he said to me, and this is how it's going to work. Every day you're going to pray for the removal of that character defect and for the change in behavior. And every day you're going to call me, because this was a critical character defect. It was infidelity. I'll come clean with the revelation here so that we're not trying to be mysterious or second guessing. 25 years married, it never occurred to me to be faithful. That's a story for another day. But I had learned in the fourth step process, in the column 4, that I'm responsible for the way I think and feel and behave. That was a spiritual awakening. I had learned in the sex inventory from the 9 questions the impact of my behavior on other people, especially in my partnership, in my marriage. I had learned on page 70 in the big book at the tail end of the sex inventory, that it says if you continue this behavior, that you go against your ideals and your principles. I was very clear that my principle had surfaced to a consciousness level that fidelity was, in fact, a principle that I had put in the closet and completely been in denial about it, both consciously and subconsciously. But I knew that that was my principle, that was my value proposition in a committed relationship. I'm not putting that on anybody else. It was mine, and I knew it was mine. It didn't come from my religion. It didn't come from my family. It didn't come from the program. It came from me. I knew that that was one of my organic principles. And so I was in my fourth step, I was very clear about my sex ideal, the principles to guide me forward. And this man made it really clear. He said, you either have to get divorced or you have to stop this behavior. I mean, he wasn't telling me what to do. He was giving me the logic of it. He was objective, concretely confrontive. And he said, you call me every day and tell me how you're behaving, what you're praying for and how you're behaving. Call me every day because you're human. Pray every day because you're powerless. Pray every day to have the inclination removed. Call me every day to hold yourself accountable for the behavior. Do you know that within, I think it was 24 or 48 hours, the behavior was changed? Hear my vocabulary, was changed. All the energy in it was removed for the behavior. We continued the accountability on a daily basis for a month, but after I had shown some stability in this area, the man says, why don't you call me once a week? I prayed every day for 2 years before the inclination went away. I'm making this very redundantly clear because it's such a powerful distinction, and it's not subtle once you see it or once you experience it. The inclination is the character defect, over which you're powerless, that generates the behavior over which I am responsible, 100%. After about 2 or 3 months of weekly accountability, we then changed it because the stability was there to monthly accountability. On the telephone, it wasn't a face-to-face, it was a telephone call. And after about 2 years, the inclination was removed and we stopped the prayer and the accountability. And it's never returned, not even a hint of mint. And I'm saying it this way with this elaborate story and the redundant, perhaps, and the careful sense of detail, even though the steps are short, 6 and 7. they are transformative, very powerful. I'm powerless to change my behavior. I'm really powerless to change the inclination for the behavior. But with accountability, I was able to have in prayer the behavior change fairly immediately. And with consistent prayer and accountability over time, the inclination went away. I was never able to do that in my religious tradition, even though I had studied to be a monk. I mean, the dichotomy is startling and humbling, actually. Self-help and therapy, and even AA, those first 4 years. No, didn't touch me. But the step work, and these 2 steps specifically. The 4th step began to change me, as I've mentioned. That's where my spiritual awakening really began, that 4th column of the resentment inventory. But 6 and 7 brought it across the goal line, because then I was able to change and be changed. It's a combination that I started out with talking even tonight, that alchemy of willingness on my part and grace on the mysteries part. Notice that the prayer doesn't pray for my comfort, my happiness, my contentment. It prays for my usefulness, not even to myself, my usefulness to God and my fellows. You see, the problem, and look at my hands here, the problem is our self-centeredness. My will always choose me. And the turning that we talk about in step 3 and commit to doing steps 4 through 7 is that turning. I hope you see it. Maybe you could even produce it for yourself, literally from a physical standpoint. When we take our hands and point it inward, my self-centered, I will always choose me. But when I do this work, the combination of my willingness and grace, I turn. It's no accident, I think. It's a wonderful, at least, symbol of my relationship with the Spirit and my relationship with people. I turn from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness, other with a capital O and other with a small o. That's the spiritual coin of steps 11 and 12, isn't it? Step 11, I'm in conscious contact and I'm improving that conscious contact. And step 12, I'm distributing the grace in me, the experience in me, the message in me to the community about me, being other-centered with a small o. Bill calls this work soul surgery. This is where the healing begins to take place. It's my experience, and it's not a word, I don't believe it's in the big book. I believe it is in the 12 and 12. I've not done a match of the words. But healing is the outcome of step 7, the beginning of the healing. The balance of the healing comes at the end of the 9th step with the forgiveness process. Much more about that later. We talked about in step 1, we talked about the bedevilments. That's Bill's word in the 2nd paragraph on page 52. That's the behavioral description, This is how we behave when we're unmanageable. This is how we behave, page 52, those bedevilments, when in fact we're selfish and self-centered, when we're living in the darkness. Bedevilments, to be controlled as if by devils. This work is exorcism, not in any religious sense, but with the power of that word, removing the devils out of us, cutting the puppet strings from people and circumstances or habits and emotional immaturity. There's a story in the rooms, of course, you've heard it maybe, but it's just such a wonderful story. I can't not include it as part of the conclusion of the step 7 discussion about, it's a apocryphal story. It's made up to make a point. It's not true. About Michelangelo standing in front of a block of marble, and somebody comes up and says, Michael, how do you know what you're going to carve? He said, I don't. I pray and then remove all that doesn't belong. I mean, the image of that is just so powerful. My false self has covered up my real self, and I don't know what my real self is. But when I do steps 4 and 5 and 6, I chip away at the false self. And this prayer is the sulfuric acid that's poured on the parts that don't belong, and the real self appears. You've all heard, and I'm sure from the Buddhist literature, I believe it is, the story about the 2 wolves. Well, this disciple of this master comes up in this Buddhist literature, and he says, Master, I've been working really hard, and I'm making a lot of progress by your own admission, but there seems to be 2 wolves fighting in me, a light wolf and a dark wolf. And they seem to be always fighting to the death in me. Master, which one wins? The master says with a smile on the face, the one you feed. Oh my God. I mean, it's so relevant for us here in step 6. One of my teachers, and I'll end with this, is Richard Rohr. You've heard me talk about him. He's a Franciscan priest. He's not in the program, but he's deeply spiritual, probably a prophet and a mystic, a prolific writer. Not that all of his books are relevant to any type of suggested reading, but one is, he wrote on the 12 steps, breathing underwater. He's been familiar with the 12 steps because he runs a retreat center in Albuquerque, just outside of Albuquerque. And the AA, local AA, asked him if they could rent a room from the retreat center. And at some point, he rented the room to them and said to them, and later on was thinking, well, these are alcoholics. I don't know much about them. I better go down and see what they're doing, making sure that it's okay, because he really didn't know much about them. So he got permission from them. It was an open meeting for him anyway, to sit in the back of the meeting, not to participate, but just to observe. Well, he became fascinated with the conversations and with the witness to transformation. And so he continued to, probably still does, sit in those meetings periodically, but he got a real appreciation of the spirituality of the 12-step process. And one of his quotes is, we either transform our character defects or we transmit them. I mean, that's in your face. If you're filled with the bedevilments, that's what you transmit. And to the extent that you have the bedevilments, that's what you transmit. If you have the darkness and the clouds and the shade in you, that's what you transmit. You're not transmitting the light. And to the extent that those clouds and that darkness diminish and are eliminated, the light is able to shine in us, to us, and then through us. this process 6 and 7 is about transformation. I've talked about that right from the beginning, a spiritual awakening. That's a synonym. It's not sophisticated in the sense of understanding. I use the word change, but I also connect it with radical. The word radical comes from the Latin radix, the root. Our root problem is selfishness and self-centeredness, and this problem excises. That's a surgical term for removing the cancer. Step 6 and 7 are the surgical tools. If you have a thought, a feeling, or a behavior, a habit, or a way that you don't want to continue, that's both harmful to the quality of your life and harmful to the quality of the life of other people, and you want to change it. There's preparation work, of course, but then apply steps 6 and 7 as I've described it. Pray for the specific removal and change of that thought or feeling or behavior specifically, and get an accountability partner that you will specifically hold yourself accountable to for the behavior, not for the inclination, certainly not at the beginning, but for the behavior. And whether that's daily or weekly or monthly depends on the substance of the mischief. If it's very substantial, perhaps you want to adopt something close to what I did in terms of the rhythm of accountability. If it's lesser impact on your life and other people, you might want to do it in a different way. But if you want to change specific behavior, this is the specific process, step 6 and 7, especially step 7. Pray because you're powerless. Hold yourself accountability because you're human and you're 100% responsible for your behavior. No equivocation, no excuses, nothing about your history, nothing about your genetics, nothing about your biology, nothing about your psychology. You are responsible for your behavior, period. Wow. All right, let's have a conversation about any aspect of 6 and 7. Well, let's stay with the combination, but especially step 7 or any of the comments that I've made. If you have questions on it, you have comments on it, you have experience with it, raise your hand and we'll have some dialogue about it. At the end of tonight, I will invite you to pray with me publicly the 7-step prayer from the book. If you've written your own 7-step prayer, you're welcome to read it. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just open to it. If you want to read it for us, quite frankly, we find it quite inspirational to hear other people's prayers. And but that's a very private thing for you. And then in terms of next week, next Tuesday, I'll begin to unpack the step 8. And so that would be assignment number 21. And really it's about taking a look at pages 76 to 83, item number 2 there, reading. And you'll note there on page 76 that Bill combines 8 and 9. In terms of his opening comments, he says, now we're going to look at 8 and 9. All right. He combines it. I'm not going to do that. I want you to read pages 76 and 83 from the perspective of only step 8. Yes, it's a mix of step 8 and 9. Yes. But I'm going to parse it. I'm going to separate it out in terms of my commentary next week and probably the following week in terms of step 8. And then after that, I'll have you read the same material in preparation for our step 9 discussion. Obviously, you're not starting step 9 at least from the process that we're here, you might be in step 9 with your own sponsor or step guide or your own cycle, but not from my instructions. We're looking at step 8 next week, and probably the following week. Then we'll be looking at experientially the instructions on step 9 and my experience with step 9 and your experience with step 9. And that'll be probably at least 2, maybe 3 weeks. And at the end of that, we'll be looking at forgiveness.
You know, I looked up the word inclination. It said a natural tendency or urge to act or feel in a particular way. And I was thinking that, Eddie, when I was listening, when you shared about your particular character defect, and I know with mine, that for me, it's almost like, this may sound really stupid, but it's almost like they give me this illusion of power. Like, that's why I think it's hard to let go sometimes, because I think that if I hang on to this, I'll have the power I need or the control I need, or and like listening to you tonight, I was sitting here thinking, oh my God, like if I let go of all of it, like 100% of the power I'm going to need is going to have to come from God, you know, or from my higher power. Yeah. A spiritual, So
it's that's a wonderful line of discernment. You're thinking about the way you operate, the way you think, the way you feel, the way you behave. And there's a whole story about what's been helpful to you.
Mm-hmm.
Is the story true? I have several men who I've taken through the steps who say, oh, no, Herb, that character defect has been a real asset in my corporate life. It's really helped me become successful. And I go, yeah, you're so successful. You're in AA and you're sitting here talking to me about your brokenness. That's how successful you are. You want to rethink that a liability could possibly be an asset? I mean, it's not possible. It's either a liability defect or it's an asset virtue. It can't be both. And if it's a defect, it's going to have deleterious negative impact on you and the people around you, whether you're aware of it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, Herb, stop talking.
No, well, this weekend I was in a lot of social events happening on Saturday and Sunday that were very special to me. And I found myself a couple of times slipping back into this old, you know, kind of smart ass behavior, because I was trying to show off. I was trying to be, I didn't really want to be the center of attention, but it was like, I thought I kind of did, you know, it's like, I wanted to make sure they remembered me and that it was bad. It was just,
yes.
And in one incident, I think I owe somebody an apology. Like I got a little too smart assy. Yeah. And I didn't mean it that way, you know.
Yeah, I do know. Yeah. Do you know the root word for sarcasm?
I do. To tear the flesh or something, right?
Yes. No, it's from the inquisitorial days of torture. It's a hook. It's a hook they use to tear the flesh. Oh.
Well, I wasn't sarcastic, but smart ass is another word for sarcasm. I know.
Well, maybe not, but yeah. But
oh no, I know what you mean.
The genre, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's in the vicinity. Yeah.
It's a kissing cousin.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Thanks.
I was pleased to hear you say that the acorn and the tree image resonates with you. Ever since it was early in my attending of your workshops on a Saturday. I think it was step 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you presented that slide, and it was like, like that was it. That was it for me. It made very, very good sense, because I don't care who thinks what about
Yeah.
Buddha, Allah, and God, and Kamako Saki and the Ninja Turtles, but you can't really argue with an acorn and an oak tree.
Yeah.
I thought that was just great. And then I find myself with my column work doing all my prayers have been starting with my creator.
Oh,
My creator. And I didn't really realize it until I got like 62 column worksheets in.
yeah.
And then I wanted to also, just for what it's worth, I wanted to share, I know a couple folks who are pretty heavily gung-ho involved in a 12-step fellowship. And they told me they had never heard of or used a set-aside prayer. And I got almost overwhelmed with a feeling of sadness.
Oh, right.
Because at least for me, I don't know how I could have done it without that set aside. It's like critical for me.
Yeah. Right. Well, it was life-changing for me again at 10 years of sobriety. We may, I've said it, I know in the past, but we may have lost track of that importance. I was 10 years sober. I went through the steps twice with different people without the set-aside attitude or prayer. But then this man at 10 years of sobriety started out that way. And for me, that was the best process of going through the steps that I had, because it allowed me to identify my own agnosticism and have that vocabulary and that training and that habit of thinking removed, that gave me a whole new relationship with what I call the mystery. Yeah.
I remember starting with your book, and for me it was just that little bit of permission that I needed. I know you're right, you know you're right, but just for this exercise you can just pretend like you're thinking of it differently, even though you're right.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, that's the willing to be willing to be willing. Yeah.
Still right, but just willing.
Yeah.
But then so clearly not right. And
right.
it's good. It's good stuff. So
wow, this workshop just gets better and better every week. It's just the little epiphanies are amazing.
Wonderful.
I was just downloading the character defect worksheets, and I read the first part about personality disorders.
Yeah.
And I figured something out.
All right.
I'm a narcissist.
All right. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Not me. I'm not oh my God. I read this and I was like, oh,
very embarrassing, isn't it?
It is terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible, but at least I figured it out, right?
Yeah.
So that's good, because that means I can catch myself, right? Now I can catch myself.
With the consciousness is helpful, but you do know that, at least as I understand it from the professionals, the psychiatrists and the psychologists, this is the DSM, the diagnostic something statistical, whatever. This is their official professional thing. And from what I understand is, it's irremediable. It can't be fixed. It can't be changed by therapy or medication.
Right.
We're screwed. Right? All right. And except now, I mean, I can say it with a smile on my face, because it has changed for me.
Yes.
As I'd mentioned earlier, but it has changed. It doesn't go away.
Right.
But I can pay attention to it. I can recognize it, or I can hear other people when they tell me, like my daughters,
So then I decided, well, it's time to go through this defect, the character defects, and see what pops up for me. I had to go through them a few times because I'm so good at denial. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I went to a psychiatrist for years while I was drinking and using, and I could not figure out what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
I left that part out.
Well, they're not that trained in some aspects also. So,
But it's just silly that I was there to get better and I didn't. Like, it's crazy that you don't.
you don't tell them the truth.
Yes, yes.
Well, that's what the big book says, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. I had a question before I want to go through one of these, and that was, remember when you talked about the self and having it be in your center, have your sense of self needs to stay in your core rather than, like, for example,
Right.
I had this relationship recently and I felt the little star in me going over and going into that person.
Yeah.
And I lost it.
Yeah.
And I started becoming codependent. That's another thing I figured out I was.
Yeah.
I'm a mess.
No, no. You just have some interesting aspects.
Yes. I'm multifaceted.
Yeah.
No, but it's I feel grateful that at least I did this work, and as embarrassing as it is, I mean,
Right.
it's enlightening. And as far as, here's one, for example, the character defect is irresponsible. Now, I don't like to say that, but
Yeah.
what is my behavior? I procrastinate tasks that will help me be financially independent.
Yeah.
And what am I defending? I'm defending my unrealistic 1940s movie with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert mentality. So what is the opposite of this defect? Action. Make a list and stick to it. Right?
Well, make a list for guidance. I use my lists not as deadlines. I use them as targets, so that I set up a system of priorities, and I can rearrange the priorities based on my mood, my energy, my time, my recalibration.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you have Post-it notes, or how do you read?
Absolutely.
All over the wall?
No, all over my day planner. I
Okay. All
probably
right.
didn't bring it here. Yeah. No, I reload my day planner with empty Post-it notes every Sunday.
Oh, wow, that's really organized. Wow. I just want to, what behavior would this virtue, which is, targets and sticking to the list, manifest, and realizing my true calling, I think. I'm a creative.
What does that mean? What is your true calling?
I'm an artist and a writer.
There you go. All right. Did you say a writer?
Mhm.
Okay, wonderful. Good that you know that. All right.
Yeah. So I just wanted to do this other one. These are just quick, This was weird. It's fear of deprivation.
Okay.
And what is my behavior? I buy 3 carrot cakes in case of the apocalypse.
Do you eat?
I have to load up, you see.
Yeah, no. Do you eat them?
I do. I don't eat them all at the same time. I eat them for breakfast. Okay. They're cupcakes. They're not a whole cake.
I'm
Cupcakes.
thank you for recalibrating my imagination.
Right. Yeah. Because I decided I can't quit sugar, so I'm just going to have it in the morning. So, but I do, like, if I see all the cupcakes, because sometimes I go and they don't have any, and then I get that same feeling that I used to get when my dealer wasn't home.
Of course. Yeah.
What is the opposite of this defect? Stop buying carrot cake. Well, no, it's live in the moment. I mean, I have this fear of not having what I need in case the end of the world comes, or
There's room for planning, and then there's no room for that kind of insecurity.
Right.
As the big book suggests about fear, it's about a lack of trust. And now Bill says a lack of trust in God, but it's really a lack of trust in the universe, in life, in reality, in yourself, in other people. So it has a lot of dimensions.
Right.
But so the key question here, and the behind the turnaround worksheet is what's your perception of healthy? What's your perception? It doesn't have to be my perception or your sponsor's perception. Although if it's mine and your sponsors or something along that line, you need to like say, well, am I in denial about this? If I'm going against common sense of people who you admire or have, you hold in high respect in terms of the way they conduct their life. So, but it's about you making decisions, taking the actions based on those decisions, and evaluating the outcome. Are you getting the outcome that you want?
In the moment.
Well, so if I thought that way, I would drink Johnny Walker Black Label.
Yeah.
Because in the moment, it's excellent. I like the taste, I like the feeling,
Yeah.
all right, etc. But I don't like what happens within 15 minutes or 15 hours. We need to think long-term, not short-term.
Yeah.
And that's a relative term for us also. What is the long-term benefit? I mean, in the long run, we're all dead.
Right.
Yeah, but how do you want to live your life? A quality life. And everyone has to come to grips with that if they want to live a conscious life.
Right. Right. I mean, I was exploring more the feeling of being stuck someplace without things that I like.
Well, yeah, but you need to live in reality too. All right.
Oh, and I don't like that either.
Well, all right. Well, then you don't have to. But
No,
you don't have to. There are just consequences.
No, I realize this. I mean, that's all part of the Clark Gable, the movie thing. I mean, I really woke up in about 2 years ago. I really feel like I woke up from being in a trance my whole life, basically.
Yeah.
And
the whole movie industry is built on creating these kinds of fantasies. You talked about the Julia, whatever her name is, Roberts,
yeah.
In that movie, that was a wonderful,
Pretty Woman.
It was just a great. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was fun to watch, but unfortunately it builds a fantasy, doesn't it? Unrealistic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I tend to like those, and they
Disney made a nice living on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to question when I start liking somebody if I'm being
correct.
My expectations are wrong, and I figured that out from doing the third and fourth columns.
Right.
That my expectations can be a problem with people.
If you haven't read Dr. Berger's new book, Emotional Sobriety, you probably would, given this conversation, you would probably benefit from it. Fortunately, he's written them for contemporary people. The chapters are very short. I mean, 2-3 page chapters. It's wonderful. Best book he's written.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Listening to what you said about we either transform our defects or we transmit them.
Yeah.
I thought about that a minute. And it's really like you can insert a lot of words in that place of defects.
You bet.
We either transmit our pain, we either transform it or transmit it. It could be unhappiness, it could be pain, unhappiness. It's like you can literally insert any word there, and it feels like that works really well.
Well, the truth is,
so that was just
the truth is we're contagious. We are always transmitting. Who we are is what we do.
Yeah, I just kind of had that epiphany when I thought about that a minute, and then I started thinking about that, and I started playing with those words, and it makes sense no matter no matter what word you put in there. So I just thought I would share that. And then also,
yeah, good for you. It's very, it helps you have an insight when you take words and you play with them and you experiment with your own phrases. Yeah.
and as I've learned and as I've grown and as I've changed from being around here a little while now, I kind of came to another conclusion, and that was like the way I was living my life. Like I could say I wear my emotions on my sleeve, you know, I'm kind of that kind of person. So I had, one of my biggest things was I had a lot of trouble controlling my emotions.
Sure.
And I was definitely powerless, not knowing then, of course, what I know now, but I was powerless over being able, I was 100% powerless over being able to control it. And I've kind of like changed the wording in that in a way where it's like, when you haven't done this work, and at least if you're like me and you're operating the way I did, it was just kind of operating on raw emotion. I'm not able to, there is no pause button.
No.
There's no pause button, and there was no talk to someone else or reason things out. Like I didn't have any of those tools, you know.
Well, you're very fortunate. You're very fortunate because the majority of the population in prisons have the description that you just made.
Prisons. Well, I was definitely in prison, you know, maybe not there, but I was.
I meant for real. Yeah. Yeah. They are allowing their emotions to manage their lives. Yeah.
That was my life.
Yes.
That was my life then. That was my intellect.
Yes.
I was free to roam the streets and drive my car and put gas in and do what I want. And I was literally shackled.
Well,
yeah.
And that's what I say. I thought I was a Renaissance man and I was a Neanderthal. Yeah. Yeah.
Another insight is I see this thing happen yesterday. And it would be just a normal everyday occurrence where someone does something to someone else. And then when they're confronted, they react in this way where they're instantly like super defensive and actually very confrontational. And just because we're called out on something, it's basically about to turn into
it goes in two different directions. Of course, we've got the lions and the turtles.
Well, this guy was ready to brawl over something because he called out on it, and he was definitely wrong. And I think that's something else that I was able to see today. I know that if you've done nothing wrong, I don't believe that you'll react that way. But he was so defensive, and it was like, oh, this guy's just incriminating himself, and he doesn't have the ability to see that. But when he's reacting the way he's reacting, it's like, oh my, if you're innocent, why would you act that way?
Well, you and everybody here has an unfair advantage over the general population because we're conscious.
I could just see it so clearly, and like I explained it to other people. And I'm like, it's just obvious. Like, okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to share a spiritual experience that happened this morning, specifically related to my behavior and being entirely ready. It's kind of a 6 and 7 combo. And so I've mentioned before that I have ADHD. And for me, I have accountability partners in UA, and this has been a long time I've been working at this, where I track my time and do different things. And for me, what I've realized is I had a huge breakthrough when, rather than scheduling each thing I did, I scheduled by category. And I pretty much just have 3 categories: earning, self-care, and relationships.
All right.
And 12-step goes into relationships. And then when I delineated all the activities I did by these categories, I saw I was completely anorexic in relationships. And so anyway, so in scheduling my day now, I have someone I speak to. We we say what when we went to bed, and then we go through our day hourly and what we did. And then we discuss when we're time drunk. And today it hit differently because I was like, what does time drunk mean to me? And it's not just like going on social media or thinking about somebody and going off into oblivion. It's believing I cannot schedule my day and thinking that I will get the things done I need to get done.
Oh,
And then also I have action partners who are in other programs like but their program rubs off. And in that program, when you make a change with your food plan, one of my friends, she has to text someone, if she makes a change. And stick with me. I know I'm going all over, but you just stick with me for a second.
No, I'm hearing the ingredients of accountability. No, it's great. It's as long as we don't get too into the weeds. Yeah.
Yes. And so anyway, I was listening and, I'm hearing, this is now a vocal accountability I was doing on text before, and I'm hearing this person say her day back to me. And I was like, what is time drunk? And I said, oh, it's when I don't stick to my schedule, and I think things are going to get done. It sounds so basic.
Yeah.
But when I felt it, and then I'm like, oh, and I can reach out when I make a change.
Yeah.
I can do all these different activities within the category. I'll schedule like 9 to 12 for self-care, and I can do all these different things and move them around. So I have the freedom. But as soon as that hit me, I was like, the freedom in surrender, because I was like, well, I don't trust this schedule. That's the other thing that came in. I'm like, I don't trust this schedule. I'm like, well, wait, where did this schedule come from? I'm being told from God, this schedule is coming from God. And then I'm not trusting. I'm like taking it back. So what's my behavior? Why don't I just do what I've written down, as uncomfortable as it is? Why don't I just do what I have written down? And then all I have to do is, when I track my time, it's like exactly what I've written down. So it's not as difficult,
Right.
So anyway,
See, what you're doing is you're establishing in a very formal way guidelines for your behavior, which as you then do it becomes habit, and you don't need to be so formal about it.
Well, it was the freest day because
Yeah.
I'd really gone through my schedule the night before. I'd gone through it again this morning, and then I spoke it out loud before it happened. And by that part of doing almost a fifth step before I had a chance to do a fourth step, it was weird. Like it was, that part of it was just, and the whole thing that kept coming into mind is, I want to be the director. I want to arrange all the actors, all of that different stuff was coming in. And then reverting back to step 3 of I'm no longer in charge, just continually being in step 3 throughout all of these things. Am I entirely ready? Please take the good and please take all of me.
Yeah.
So that's it. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And given the time, I'm going to put on hold our prayer together, and we'll do that at the beginning of our time next week. Perhaps we'll have some more discussion about step 7 and anything that you thought about or experienced between now and then. And then in the first half of the time next week, we'll pray the prayer and then move into the discussion on step 8, rather than put ourselves under any type of time pressure. So there's the prayer of St. Francis. This is the prayer of transformation. As I've mentioned, listen to the turning from our self-centeredness to other-centeredness. That's the heart of this prayer, a gift of this process. We are turned. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Thanks, everybody.